All right, let's get started. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Jessica Hellman. I'm the director of the Institute on the Environment. I'm thrilled to see you here today and to be hosting today's conversation. For those of you who might be new to the Institute and perhaps some of our old friends, we are an interdisciplinary hub. We're a place at the University of Minnesota that's about bringing people together to address really complicated, complex, but shared challenges in sustainability. And sharing knowledge and forging connections across different peoples and their perspectives is a critical part of building a future where people and planet prosper together. And that's what the Institute on the Environment is committed to doing, help bringing that sustainable future possible, making it possible and helping to bring it about. So a flagship of the Institute is some work on what we call impact goals. And impact goals are sustainability outcomes. They're things that we are seeking to achieve. And we focus the work of the IonE community on several of these impact goals in any period of time for several years. Our current impact goals are helping to make Minnesota the first carbon neutral state in the nation, safe drinking water for all Minnesotans, and defining a sustainable land use for our state. And in each of those, you heard Minnesota because it's our home state and our natural laboratory, but we do this work for all people all around the world. So the Salon series you've signed in here to join today, this semester is going to address aspects of our current impact goals. And our goal here is to create opportunities for discussion, for connection among leaders, and to explore research needs and also public challenges. So we're going to help bring together academia, government, and practice. This semester, we're also dedicating our attention to some recent grantees and other work related to an intensive workshop we had on agriculture and carbon neutrality in the fall of 2020. And I want to acknowledge that funding for this Salon series is provided by the McKnight Foundation and also from the University of Minnesota through the Institute on the Environment. Our topic today is a fun one. We're going to talk about an important one. We'll talk about emerging agriculture and the climate policy landscape with a focus on soil health. And I'm very excited to introduce our featured speaker today, Minnesota State House Representative Todd Lippert, who represents District 20B in the Minnesota House, serving portions of Le Sueur and Rice counties. In his second term, Representative Lippert also serves as the Assistant Majority Leader in addition to his work in the House on agriculture, climate and energy, behavioral health, and environment and natural resources. These are his committee appointments. So we'll start today with today's discussion with an overview presentation by Representative Lippert, and then we're going to have a moderated Q&A discussion with Eric Lansdorff and Heidi Reiss, both of whom will introduce themselves later. There's Heidi waving at us, yes. And I want to set the tone for our discussion by doing a very quick but very important acknowledgement. I want to acknowledge that the Institute on the Environment offices, which some of us are in, others of us are joining remotely, and the entire University of Minnesota, Twin Cities, sits on the traditional and treaty land of the Dakota people. And at the Institute on the Environment, we think it's very important to acknowledge the people on whose lands we live, learn, and work, as we, as an institute and our whole university, seeks to improve and strengthen our relationship with tribal nations. We understand Indigenous knowledge systems can be crucial ways of knowing this place that we now call Minnesota, and we honor that knowledge and the people who keep it. We commit to moving forward in respectful relations with Indigenous people toward healing, reconciliation, and stewardship of land, water, and biodiversity. And lastly, I'd like to remind us all that this event is being recorded. And if you don't want to be on video, please feel free to turn your camera off. And I would now like to welcome Representative Lippert.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hellman, for that introduction. And I'm just going to share my screen. It looks like I've been able to do that. It's great to be with all of you and an honor to be speaking today. I've learned so much already from the Institute on the Environment, and I look forward to our conversation today and look forward to future conversations, because I know I'll be learning so much more as we continue collaborating. So thank you for all the work you do. So I'm excited to talk with you about soil health. I'm really excited about this area of work. What I'll be talking about are the soil health policies that we're able to pass at the legislature this session. And we were able to get quite a bit done, which is exciting. And then also some policies that are connected to soil health that we don't necessarily talk about as soil health, but they're layered on top of it and connected to it. I'll talk about some of the work that local farmers are doing in the Northfield area, which is where I represent, and then start with my story and just what shapes me and what shapes my interest in this work. So just making sure there we go. So I grew up in a little town, Larchwood, Iowa is where I grew up. It's a town of 700 people, Northwest Iowa. I didn't grow up on a farm, though the farm that my dad grew up on, that my uncle farmed, which was just an hour away, was my favorite place in the whole world. But it went the way of so many farms. My cousins didn't want to farm it. They rented the land out. The renters ended up having a fire there that burned the house in the forest, and the land ended up being sold, and the whole farmstead was plowed under. It's just a field now. My dad can't even drive by it because it's too painful. And we see these and similar stories happening across the landscape. One of my concerns is agriculture and healthy communities, and how we can have policies that support both. But I also did a lot of work on farms growing up. Back in the day when we walked beans, because we didn't have Roundup Ready beans, I was in the field a lot in the summer and also baling straw and hay. So I spent a lot of time around farms as I was growing up. I need to make the disclaimer, I'm not a scientist, though I care deeply about soil health. I'm a pastor, and I've been an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ since 2003. People ask what type of denomination the UCC is. I say tongue-in-cheek, it's the last door on the left in Christianity. We care deeply as a denomination about social justice, environmental justice. It's a part of the church that sees no conflict between living a life of faith and deepening our understandings of the world through science, our understandings of our history through accurate studying of history. So that's kind of the part of the church that I come out of. And I'll talk a little bit more about how my faith shapes how I see these issues in just a moment. But also another thing I'll say about me is that I've always been fascinated by watching things grow, and the soil and the garden. Some of my favorite memories are planting seeds with my dad in the garden and just kind of mesmerized in awe and wonder of what would happen next. So the soil has always been sacred territory for me. Now, excuse me, one of the dangers of asking a pastor to speak is that you're going to get a little biblical theology. So I'm going to do that now. I'll try not to get too wound up, but buckle in, do whatever we need to do for this. But this definitely shapes how I think and who I am. One of my questions, as someone who's been preaching regularly since 2003 in churches in Southwest Wisconsin, in the heart of dairy country, and also most recently at First United Church of Christ in Northfield, where I was pastor from 2012 until 2020, is what sorts of resources might this ancient faith tradition have to offer us now as we face the climate crisis? And it turns out there's quite a bit, I think. So despite kind of the popular notion, or maybe some of the strongest voices in Christianity, offering a land ethic that is not helpful and not faithful to the tradition that comes out of Genesis 1, be fruitful and multiply and have dominion over, which is not true to the rest of the story, the first creation story. As we move to Genesis 2, we have the beginning of a very, very helpful worldview, I think. So, and we have the first vocation given to human beings, which is that we're to be garden keepers. And Adam is formed out of the dust of the ground. Adam literally means Adama, literally means mud creature, and is placed in the garden and told to keep it. And so we have no separation at all between human beings and the land. They're intimately connected. And this sort of interconnection between the land, human beings, and the holy continues throughout the scripture. The ancient Israel can't imagine not being dependent upon the land. That's a modern luxury. So much so that as you're reading these stories, you see that when there is human sin or separateness, or this relationship is not correct between human beings, one another, and with God, there are consequences for the land too. There's famine, there's drought, there's flood. On the other side, when there are visions of wholeness, of restoration, the prophets are offering these. There isn't just wholeness and restoration for human beings. There's wholeness and restoration for the land too. The land thrives. There's abundance. So these things fit together. And I've been kind of sinking into this worldview more and more. It definitely shapes how I think. So much so that I see the climate crisis not just as an existential one, which it absolutely is, but as a spiritual crisis, that it's a fundamental misunderstanding of where the place of human beings is in the whole. And the climate solutions that are most exciting to me are the ones that I think start to heal this and start to move us as human beings in the direction of working with nature, of finding our proper place once again, or what that proper place might be now in this moment. So for me, the climate solutions that are most exciting are the ones that are technological and ecological too. Just last week, I had a chance to hear from Matma Mehra of the Drawdown Project, one of the senior researchers there. And she was talking to the National Caucus of Environmental Legislators. And she said that 11 of the top 20 climate solutions are nature-based. And so focusing on the soil and regenerative agriculture is, one of these, but that seems both foundational and strategic and wise at the same time. And it certainly is important for my neck of the woods. So I live in Northfield. We have the Cannon River moving through Northfield. It's beautiful all the time, except when it floods. And we've had 3 separate 500-year floods in Northfield in the last 10 years. And we don't have many options for what we do in response to this, other than we need farmers to be able to hold water back on the landscape. We need that water to, when we have extreme rain events in the Cannon River watershed basin, we need that water to slow down. So we need water to be able to infiltrate the soil. We need more restored wetlands. We need more vegetation in place. And of course, you can see the difference between the low river levels as far as relatively clear blue water and the amount of soil that's in the river when it's flooding in Northfield too. So soil health building practices are practices that will make a concrete difference in the city where I live and the river that our city is built around. We've had amazing local farmer leaders in the Northfield area who've been working with soil health building practices for a while. And they're telling their story. And they've been talking with me and shaping how I think about things and the policies that I've been pursuing. And they've been working on those policies too. They've also been talking with other farmers. And what's really fun for me is I talk with these farmers in the Northfield area that are doing no-till and low-till, cover crops, perennial crops, managed rotational grazing, and farmers across the state who are trying out these practices. What I notice every time is how excited they are. They're just thrilled about what they're seeing on their soil. I joke with them sometimes, excuse me, that they're finding religion. So if we look in the farmer in the green cap, his name is John Becker. His wife, Deb Becker, and John are just doing amazing work on their farm, and they're telling their story over and over again. but they were at a Cannon River Watershed Partnership meeting talking about the different soil health building practices are making on their soil. And John said at one point, okay, so I just got this USDA survey where you get on a regular basis, and I had to fill out my demographic information. And so I did, and I got to the point where I had to put in religion. And I went through the boxes, and there was, Protestant, evangelical, Catholic. I checked the box for Catholic, but I really wanted to write in cover cropper, which I think says a lot about the sort of meaning that some farmers are finding in farming in this way. The way they're seeing the land, kind of the soil come to life, and they feel like they're starting to work with nature and they're seeing real benefits. Similarly, Mike Peterson, who's in the picture on the left with the mask on, he is a real leader. He's spoken multiple times at the state legislature, also in Washington, D.C., to the House Agricultural Committee. But he said, I didn't get into these practices because I'm an environmentalist. I got into it because I want to save the soil that's on my farm. So I live on a hill. It's relatively thin soil above rock, just above the Cannon River. I don't want all my soil to wash down into the Cannon River. So I was looking for ways to farm that would help with that. And so I started farming this way. And I discovered that the soil's staying in place, water's infiltrating the soil. My crops are doing better when there's heavy rain and when there's drought. And I'm also improving water quality, and I'm reading more about the difference that farming in this way could make for the climate. And so I think he'd say it'd be great if farmers can be a part of the climate solution and not just a punching bag and part of the problem all the time. So these are some of the things I'm hearing from farmers, and also that more farmers want to put these practices in place, but they're going to need financial assistance to do it and technical assistance too. So financial assistance, because one farmer said to me here in a Zoom meeting, and he held up, I mentioned this work I was doing related to soil health, and he held up a catalog of cover crop seed and said, I want to put these practices in place, but my banker won't loan me the money because the banker doesn't see the long-term profitability for it. I know once I get 3 to 5 years in, it's going to make a difference for my farm, and this is what I need to do, but I need state support for it. And as far as financial or technical assistance is concerned, any mistake in farming is a costly mistake. And this is a new way of farming in incorporating these sorts of practices. So farmers want some of that support from experts and also other farmers that are doing it. So these conversations led to the 100% soil healthy farming bill, which we introduced and started its journey through the House in January of this year. And it was written by farmers. Farmers in particular that were a part of or are part of the Land Stewardship Project. But these farmers are also connected to a variety of other organizations, and all are kind of working together in similar networks. And the legislation has a few main components. One is a soil health goal. So I, for one, don't want to see bare soil anymore, and would like to get us to the point where we have cover on the landscape all the time. And I think a goal is helpful both as a motivator and a measuring stick. A goal properly constructed. So similar to 100% clean energy by 2040, I think we should have 100% soil healthy farming, 100% of tillable acres employing soil health building practices by 2040, 100% of farmers using these practices by 2035. This received resistance in conversation in the House, though there's some even more aggressive goals by organizations nationally. We had one more tried a goal of 30 by 30, 30% of acres by 2030. That had to be put on the shelf, but we'll take another run at that as we move into this next session. Another goal of the legislation is a robust cost share program, similar to what we see in the state of Maine, the state of Maryland. And in talking with some state agencies and organizations, we wanted to signal to the federal government that we're very serious about soil health building practices in Minnesota, and that we're ready to receive federal funds as there's more interest in soil health at the federal level too. So this legislation structures or sends grants and direct payments through soil and water conservation districts, trusted partners for farmers already for soil health practices like cover crops, no-till, perennial crops, managed rotational grazing, and more. There were some originally some boosters for if you're farming organically and some other pieces. Another important element is making sure that we're gathering soil health data from farmers. We know this is an emerging area of science. There's so much we need to learn, and so much we need to learn about how these soil health practices impact different types of soil. How are they functioning in the karst region versus the central sands region in central Minnesota? How different practices do different things, where the most potential for carbon sequestration is. There are so many pieces that we need to learn. So we wanted to be gathering that data. And then there was elements related to racial equity, making sure that underrepresented groups in agriculture can benefit from these dollars, and that we're supporting more and more diversity within agriculture itself, as well as a focus on small and mid-sized farms for a few different reasons. The dollar amount for our bill initially is $5 million. And we actually did a little bit better than that as we got to the end. So this bill started with a hearing in the Agriculture Committee, and then moved to the Judiciary, where we had some conversation about data practices, and then it went to the Environment Committee, and then split off into a couple different places. So in the Environment Bill, we were able to secure $1.35 million for cost share for soil health practices. We don't have a different cost share program. We're using a cost share program that's already in place. As we had more conversation and negotiations happen, it felt like using the existing cost share program was going to be what was most workable. And we would still be able to signal to the federal government that we're ready for additional funds if those funds are available. There's also consultation with and partnership with the University of Minnesota Office for Soil Health. So we're connected to that key resource. And then in the, another part of the bill went to the Legacy Committee, and it's a part of the Clean Water Bill within the Legacy umbrella. We were able to secure $4 million in one-time funding there. So the $1.35 million in the Environment Bill, it continues in future years, what we call the tails, but at a reduced level of $400,000. So we'll definitely, I will definitely be interested in circling back and boosting that funding as we go forward. But we have $4 million in the Clean Water Fund. The language is clear. And so what I have here is the actual legislative language. It says grants for farmers who own or rent land to enhance adoption of soil health practices in areas where there are direct benefits to public water supplies. We know that the research on these practices is very clear that they benefit water quality. So we know we'll be able to show that to the federal government as we're wanting to be in competition for federal funds, the ways that we're moving the needle. And then it would also be strategic for us as a state to be focusing on the karst region, or putting in more and more soil health practices in other places in the state where public water supplies are very vulnerable to contamination because of the soil type. And here we also have $400,000 for an agreement with the U of M Office of Soil Health for applied research. So we're making sure that we're gathering the data that we need, and education, technical assistance too. So we started with the 100% soil healthy bill. We ended with this language. Don't have the goal. We don't have some of the equity pieces that we cared about, but this is what we were able to reach as far as a compromise. And I feel like this is a pretty significant win for our state. There are other pieces of legislation that are related that aren't necessarily, we don't necessarily talk about them as soil health, but they are definitely going to be improving soil health, and there's considerable overlap. One is water storage program legislation. This is a bill that has been worked on for a long, long time, especially in the Minnesota River Valley Basin. Friends of the Minnesota River and other organizations have been working on money for water storage there, because there's just tremendous concern about water quality in the Minnesota River. The water supply for the city of Mankato, one of the wells is under threat from increased erosion there. So we know we need to be slowing that water down. And we were able to, I was honored enough to take the baton and carry this legislation this year, and we were able to get it to the finish line and get it passed, get a couple $2 million for water storage in the Minnesota River Basin and also the lower Mississippi River Basin. So the Cannon River and communities on the Cannon River will benefit from some of these dollars and practices too. But we're talking again about perennial cover crops, wetland restoration, increasing soil water holding capacity. It's all circling around many of the same practices. The University of Minnesota Forever Green program is at the heart of this work too. We have, I have pictured the massive, amazing roots of Kernza, the perennial wheatgrass. More and more farmers in the Northfield area are really excited about experimenting with Kernza, and they want commercial opportunities for it. So we have to be building the commercial infrastructure at the same time that more and more crop is ready to be planted and more research is happening. And this is true with the whole suite of Forever Green continuous living cover crops. We have a lot of research. So I carried a bill that will secure $4 million from the Clean Water Fund specifically for commercialization for Forever Green crops. So that's really exciting. It's another boost for Forever Green. But we know from research is very clear on the difference that Kernza, for example, makes with water quality in filtering out nitrate contamination. We expect research also to be telling us the difference it makes for soil health and carbon sequestration too. But I believe more work needs to be done in that area. And then finally, I'll talk a little bit about trees. So I've done quite a bit of work in the forestry space. We need our forests to be the biggest carbon sink they can possibly be as we're trying to meet our climate goals in our state. And that means we need to be planting a lot of trees and addressing emerald ash borer. What I don't have listed here is that we did receive significant funding, able to secure significant funding for emerald ash borer ash management plans for cities in Minnesota, as well as preparation for reimagining northern ash forests. We have more ash trees than any state in the country. We have 1 billion ash trees. We're going to lose them all. So we need to be doing planning related to EAB, and then we need to be planting a lot of trees generally. So we have 2.5 million that was approved in the environment budget. I was happy to work on this bill too for accelerated tree planting, seed collection. I'm hopeful that we can get some infrastructure improvements for the Bedore State Nursery in a mini bonding bill this fall. If not, we'll certainly be focused on that once we start again in February. To improve our tree planting capacity in the state and get us ready to plant more and more trees for the sake of sequestering carbon. But important in this language is the cost share incentives that are mentioned, because we know that we have many feedlots, or excuse me, we have many woodlots. Feedlots, another issue related to climate and agriculture. We have many woodlots across the state that private landowners own. So if we can incentivize those landowners to make the most of those woodlots, we think there's a lot of opportunity for improving the ability of our forests to sequester carbon in Minnesota. And we also have a lot of opportunities for shrubs and hedgerows. And then you start moving into perennial crops as well. If you're talking about nut bushes or fruit trees or other crops like that. So these are kind of the suite of policies that are related to soil health that we were able to pass, funding we were able to secure. I'm excited about what we were able to achieve. And what's next, I think, is building on these policies as much as we can, learning as much as possible about the difference they're making, and then using that knowledge to build on them as much as possible, so we can do as much of what is most important and most effective. So I'll stop my presentation there, and happy to field questions and engage in conversation for the second half of our hour.
Great, I'll step in now. Thank you so much, Representative Lippert. My name is Eric Lansdorff. I'm the Program Director for the Natural Capital Project at the Institute on the Environment, focusing on the benefits that nature can provide people, which was sort of a focus of much of the presentation. And before I allow Heidi to introduce herself, I'd just say that it's been incredibly inspiring to have kind of a nice change of pace and working with a politician who is inspiring rather than dispiriting about many of these issues, and try to provide clarity and focus for us as we try to do our work to kind of help support, I think, many of the goals that the state has and that you're taking leadership on. So thank you so much for that. Heidi, go ahead, introduce yourself and take us away.
Yes, thank you so much, Representative Lippert. That was awesome. I'm Heidi Reiss. I'm a climate and energy researcher at the Institute on the Environment, working on topics in support of the carbon neutrality impact goal that Jessica described. We are going to turn to questions. We have compiled a list of questions already from the RSVPs, but if you have additional questions, please put them in the chat and we'll try to get to them. I think I'll start with kind of a nuts and bolts kind of question. Do you know, or are you aware of any efforts at the state level to come up with a soil health baseline or a carbon sequestration and soil baseline? And do you know what data sets might be used for that?
So a couple of the pieces of legislation that I was carrying one piece of legislation that was calling for planning around, like putting together a soil health plan for the state of Minnesota. We were not able to get that done. I think that's a policy for us to circle back to. I think that sort of planning and vision would be really helpful for us and would lead to the conversations that we need to have about, what should we do where, and it would kind of flush out the conversations about what data are we using, what's the best way to go about putting together the numbers so that we have the most effective plan possible for Minnesota. So we tried, we didn't succeed, but we'll keep working on it.
There were a couple of questions about data sources related to a soil health baseline. Can you speak to that at all?
So I think this is an area where I rely on those with more expertise. I think we have So, and one thing that was a lively part of the conversation this last session is there's some disagreement about what practices, like how much different practices like cover crops compared to managed rotational grazing, how much carbon will actually be sequestered. And so getting more clarity about that will be important. But, Institute on the Environment is one important source. Office for Soil Health is another. I think we need all hands on deck in sorting through the science here and building up the science so that we can get better and better at knowing exactly what's happening in the soil with these practices and can make better decisions going forward because of it.
Great. I'll take one, Heidi. One of the other issues in some of our own discussions about some of the challenges of changing practices is just awareness of programs and getting the word out. I'm just curious sort of what plans, or if this is a concern of yours, and if there are plans to kind of make sure that all farmers are aware of these opportunities and how that will kind of move forward.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think there's less. So I'm less concerned about awareness and more concerned about just farmers being willing to adopt these practices. I think there's more and more conversation happening in agricultural publications, in the news, that the resources farmers are turning to. More and more of them are talking about these practices. The trusted, having those trusted messengers for farmers is really key, as like in this area of state government, like every area of state government. Soil and water conservation districts are trusted by some farmers. Other farmers may not go there, but these dollars will be going out through SWCDs. Farmer to farmer conversations are very, very important. Farmers know their neighbors, are going to trust their neighbors, but then are also going to be asking, like, will this actually work on my soil? Your field might be different than mine. Will this work on my soil? And so I think as many places where we can have an open door for farmers to access information about these practices will be helpful. But I think we have some of the main channels covered in this legislation as far as where farmers turn to for resources. So many SWCDs at state level are connected to the federal agencies where farmers go. So that information should be in front of farmers when they show up.
Just curious, just a quick follow-up on that. Will you be tracking sort of that adoption rate?
That's a very good question. It's not something that has come up in my conversations, okay. And I don't know exactly how the Board of Water and Soil Resources tracks that. I think that would be helpful data to be collecting. So I'll ask that of the Minnesota Office of Soil Health.
We have a question from Linda Kingery on forestry. She's wondering what policy levers are included or could be added to protect forest land from conversion.
That's a very good question. So I'm hopeful that we put one of those policies in place. I didn't mention it in my presentation, but one of the policies that we were able to pass was a policy directing the Department of Natural Resources to set a carbon sequestration goal for forestry. And so it's exciting that we were able to get this passed. I think a lot of conversation has to go into exactly what is, how do we put that goal together? What's an appropriate goal? But if we have that goal in place, then I think we have something that can hold us accountable to making sure that we are managing forests in a way that they are the forest is a strong partner for carbon sequestration, and have another indicator that we're paying attention to besides production. So I think I'm hopeful that that goal is one piece, and it's in the little I've been following the conversation in forestry. It seems like there is some disagreement too about whether you're gaining the most carbon sequestration potential in planting lots of new trees, whether you get the most carbon sequestration benefit when a tree is an adolescent, for example, or a forest is relatively young, compared with when you have old growth forest and a healthy forest ecosystem. So I think we need to learn more about that too, or at least what scientists are learning needs to soak more deeply into public policy discussion.
Yeah, along those lines, Jessica actually was wondering about how policies can account for that improved knowledge of carbon storage and carbon dynamics kind of over time. Like what is sort of how do you guys reflect or change? You know, you have this policy now, but as we kind of learn more, what are the ways of kind of that feedback helping policy?
So the way the mechanics of the conversation should work is that on a regular basis, the legislature will ask University of Minnesota or the agency to do a study or to do a report on how we're doing in reaching this goal, for example. And so that information has to be gathered. As representatives, senators, electeds of the people delegate that work to the agencies. And they take gathering that information seriously and bringing it back and putting it together in report form. And so that's really our opportunity to gather that information again. And then it's a matter of political will to keep moving the issue forward. And so having electeds that are very focused on climate and public pressure to make sure that we stay focused on climate is key to deepening cycles or improving our performance and our work in that area.
Trevor Russell has a question about ag carbon markets. Just given all the uncertainties, are we ready to pursue these markets in your view?
So I have some concerns about whether I think this is all very new. Carbon markets in agriculture feels like kind of the Wild West of policy right now, and I think we need a lot more information about exactly what's happening in the soil. That any carbon market needs to be based on accurate information and accurate data. And you know what I've been hearing and learning, I don't think we're there yet. I think there's a lot more that we need to know. I also have concerns about more and more consolidation in agriculture. I want an agriculture that's sustainable and helping communities thrive, whether they're rural communities or urban communities. And so personally, I'd want to be seeing that those markets are benefiting farmers broadly and not just funneling more resources to the top, as well as trying to accelerate adoption of these practices. I think there's potential there for the conversation. My ears are open, but those are some of the concerns I have as this conversation has been beginning.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've had conversations with Greg Page, who was the former CEO of Cargill, about markets and carbon pricing, and asked him specifically about farm size. And just sort of his response was interesting in that just sort of, it seems, he said, irrelevant, like to like the goal, And so it's just clear that you would need to have a specific, like, as you mentioned, like a specific societal goal that says we want equitable farms, right? And we actually need to kind of think about that separately from the market itself. Like the market could help solve, just the environmental goal, but probably not account for that societal issue that you're bringing up, which is, yeah. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, I think they're connected. I hear you saying that there are some separate conversations happening, that in one way a carbon market could be kind of value neutral, related to that,
Right.
To that overall goal that we'd have to have more conversation on to agree about in the first place. But I do think a carbon market could easily just accelerate consolidation, and have a negative impact on communities. And that's what I'm interested in avoiding. Now, one thing that is interesting to me is, in some of the conversations about a move towards more regenerative practices, you have some farmers who are saying, like Gabe Brown in North Dakota is, really seen as a leader, that he feels like to do farming better and better, that he needs to be smaller, and that he can make more money that way if he's doing that. That's really interesting to me. But I was also in a conversation with a farmer I know well, who's an organic farmer who farms 2,500 acres, and he sees the possibilities, and he's like saying, I need these practices yesterday on the soil I'm farming, but I see the practices and some technological advances could allow me to farm more acres when there's less labor available. So it's a complex conversation. For me, what sort of agriculture leads to healthier and healthier human communities in relation to the land is kind of a guide.
So what are some, kind of getting back to the role the university can play, since we're hosting, we can, I think, ask this a little bit. What are some effective ways, like, for us to kind of continue staying in touch, to kind of make sure our own research is sort of partnering with some of the goals that you're kind of laying out? I think you mentioned report writing earlier. You think that's still the best way, or are there other means?
So I think not being bashful about reaching out to legislators, and having more of these conversations, these opportunities for exchanging ideas, building relationships is really important. Being willing to speak before the Agriculture Committee or the Environment Committee or the Climate and Energy Committee, as you've been able to do. Maybe there are some possibilities for some intentional regular work, intentional kind of stage collaborative work where we're just intentionally staying in some regular conversation. I know we had the opportunity to do that for a while. Maybe it's time to circle back now that some of these legislative policies have been put in place, to say, okay, where are we now, and how do we move things forward, and who else needs to be a part of this conversation at the table. So I'd be very open to that. I think the more voices around the table, the better. And we need you and your expertise. Like, we can't do this well without it.
I'm just looking at the final questions here. Just quickly, sorry to pivot away from the research needs, but Trevor asks, do you see a role for state policy in addressing risk management barriers? Sorry, he hears farmers saying, I could plant cover crops, but my bank won't give me a loan, and it might compromise my crop insurance. So I think your bill does some of that with direct payments, but can you speak to that question?
Yeah, so we absolutely have to be addressing that, and issues of insurance is more of a federal issue, federal farm bill issue, and there are a few directions where we need to be creating the agriculture we need as we go forward, and we have to be building infrastructure, the sort of financial infrastructure and risk management infrastructure around this agriculture as we go to. And so, you know, the current risk management infrastructure doesn't imagine cover cropping or doesn't imagine these sorts of practices, but we need it to adjust to be able to take that into account. The same is true for, it's like, especially with smaller and smaller farms, whether it's community supported agriculture, vegetable farms that are incorporating these practices, or farmers that are doing that and managed rotational grazing. They're often flying completely or going without a net completely. And we need these farmers to be able to stay in business and incorporate these practices. And they're going to need their insurance to, they're going to need insurance and have it available. And B, if they have it available, they're going to need to make sure it takes these practices into account and sees them takes into account the benefits that they provide.
All right, I think we have time maybe for one last question, do you think, Heidi?
Looks like it, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so I'll ask the sort of, what are plans for kind of what's next on tap for you? Like, what are some of the priority areas? You kind of mentioned, not quite getting everything you wanted in these bills, but certainly seems successful. What kind, what's up next?
Yeah, so I'm interested in having more conversation about, so we'll be moving into a small supplemental budget year, more of a policy year, a bonding year. I'm interested in having conversations about what are the infrastructure pieces that we need to put in place to make sure that we can make progress around soil health. I was at a Forever Green presentation. I was having the beginning of those sorts of conversations around forever green crops in particular. But it's a conversation that's broader than that as well. I want to talk about the soil health goal again, and have more conversation about that, a deeper conversation about that. I personally, and Dr. Hellman, I'd love to have more conversation with you. I'm interested in engaging around methane and emissions in methane in agriculture, and I think there's some opportunities to. So I'm imagining some work around composting that might connect with both agriculture and food waste, and some pieces like that. But I need to learn more about methane, and I think we need to put forward solutions to be addressing methane emissions in agriculture and broadly too. So if there are anyone interested in those conversations, I'd be glad to talk.
Well, I think we are wrapping up. We're almost at time. So I want to thank you, Representative Lippert, for an exciting and great presentation about soil health. And I want to thank everyone for attending on this summer noon event. And please stay tuned for more Institute on the Environment events at environment.umn.edu. Thanks again, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much.